Biden administration, for example, has made it very clear that they are fully behind Agenda 2030. They issued a fact sheet in which they said that they're fully on board with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and they are doing everything in their power to implement them. So this should be a warning. This is real. These globalists are trying to do this, and they're now driving it into legislation at every level of government. It has to be resisted, and the only way I think we can resist it effectively is at the local level, because that's where it has to end up.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for May 6th through May 13th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 2023 1-ounce Silver Krugerrand at $3.10 over spot. We also have 1 10th-ounce gold Canadian maples at $29 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're privileged to have this returning guest, Michael Rectenwald, the presumed nominee for the Libertarian Party for the presidential candidate of the United States for 2024, joins us on Liberty and Finance this Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. Michael, thank you for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
It's great to be here, Dunnigan. Thanks for having me.
There's been a lot going on in the news about things that we wanted to follow up with you, because your book, and we'll put a link to the book in the description of this video, about how we can refuse the global takeover of our lives by doing what you call the Great Refusal, is starting to play out in some exciting areas. There are multiple states that are passing legislation and being signed into law by their governors that the people of their state will not be bound by edicts coming from global entities such as the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, and so on. And you have advocated in many different ways that people need to take more control and be assertive about standing up for their God-given rights in their own lives and at the local level. Can you comment on this apparent tidal wave of states that are standing up for their rights and for the rights of their people in the face of global overreach?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great development that we're seeing states and even localities that are beginning to do what I suggest, which is the grand refusal, to refuse all these dictates coming down from the UN, the World Economic Forum, and other organizations, other globalist world organizations, the WHO. And this is what's necessary to nullify these dicta. And we even see some cases of local communities seceding from various cities. For example, we have in Louisiana, a new city is being formed called St. George, which is splitting off from Baton Rouge and establishing their own government, their own local government, to resist the imposition of taxes and to fight crime and to basically try to create a better, society on the local level. These are the great developments. Secession happening at local levels, and states declaring their own sovereignty, and likewise being able to resist the desiderata that come down from the federal government and these globalist organizations.
There have been a number of those global edicts that we've already been affected by in the past 4 years. A lot of us have lived through that, where our local authorities, whether at the state or local level, has said, well, we're just following guidelines from the World Health Organization, or we're just following guidelines from some other international body. And that sort of passing the buck up to some unnamed, unelected, anonymous, faceless body seems to fly in the face of the idea of a representative republic that we have, and free people, and innate rights. And it's heartening to see the number of states that are standing up and saying, for example, on climate treaty edicts that may come down, or on pandemic treaty edicts that may come down, and on and on and on. Economic, where they say you can't travel. There's all kinds of talk about you can't travel more than 15 minutes from your home, or you can't take certain kind of airline flights, or you can't do all these different things. eat meat or whatever may be coming down the chain in the future, that these states are standing up and saying ahead of that no longer will our people be subject to these edicts. Now, this is part of a bigger picture, and part of one headline title of that big picture is Agenda 2030. Can you explain to our viewers what Agenda 2030 is about, and what it presumes to be entitled to take over in terms of what parts of our lives, and what we can and should be doing about it?
Sure. Agenda 2030 was a resolution passed at the UN in 2015 that basically suggests that by 2030, they would have achieved these so-called Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And now the SDGs, there are 17 SDGs, and they range from things like ending world poverty, as they say, to mitigating and reversing the effects of climate change through reduction in CO2 emissions. So they're trying to drive this to the local level where it has to go, because if it doesn't reach the local level, it doesn't happen. So we have organizations like the OECD that is helping to marshal these plans into local governance. And I've recently been party to a town hall of a township in Colorado that is beginning to implement such edicts in terms of travel time, replotting the neighborhoods in terms of streets and roads, and eliminating such things as gas-powered lawnmowers, getting rid of the wood-burning fires and things like this. So all these things these SDGs it's a way to control all activity on the planet, but they have to make it local to make it work. So this is why I've advocated very strongly that we need to get liberty-minded people in positions of power at the local level to resist these impositions that are definitely on the way. And the Biden administration, for example, has made it very clear that they are fully behind Agenda 2030. They issued a fact sheet in April and suggested that, it was in September 2023, in which they said that they're fully on board with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and they are doing everything in their power to implement them. So this should be a warning. This is real. These globalists are trying to do this, and they're now driving it into legislation at every level of government. It has to be resisted, and the only way I think we can resist it effectively is at the local level, because that's where it has to end up.
Just to make it obvious how difficult it is for ordinary people to get their arms around this, if you do a quick search on a typical search engine such as Google about these topics, you'll get pages and pages and pages of things from the World Economic Forum, from the United Nations, from the European Parliament, from whitehouse.gov, from United Nations Office on this and that and the other. And it's remarkable. They're all of these headlines that come back in the search are trying to debunk and basically do fact checking, saying no, Agenda 2030 is not going to take over your life, and that the WHO pandemic treaty doesn't sign over U.S. sovereignty, and the WHO is not planning to implement a pandemic treaty, and on and on and on it goes. How about how did it get hijacked by conspiracy theories and all this sort of thing, to basically trying to counter the claims that are made by freedom-minded people, saying what we want is freedom, what we want is sovereignty, what we want is ability to control our own lives and not having you control us. But it looks like the spin efforts are out in full force right now from these organizations, and they've certainly got the main search engines. When people go looking for information, trying to fact check these things, they're going to have a heck of a time finding the stories about as we were bringing up, about the states that are passing sovereignty and protection bills for the freedom of their people, because it looks like the official story that's being told is about how wonderful, Agenda 2030 and all these lovely words like sustainable development goals, et cetera, are going to be for us.
Yeah, that's been the case for many years now, several years, since they announced the Great Reset in 2020. They have attempted to make any kind of opposition to it into a conspiracy theory. Meanwhile, as I've argued, they actually perpetrate conspiracy theories themselves by saying outlandish things, like Schwab saying at the World Economic Forum annual meeting, for example, that, the future is made by us here in this room. And we may have another pandemic on the global agenda. He says this verbatim. So it seems to me they try to create the conspiracy theory milieu or sphere or space, and then say that all criticisms of this amount to conspiracy theories, whereas they tell point blank what they're up to. The Sustainable Development Goals, and I've translated them all in my book. In other words, I have written down all of the goals, and then I translate them into ordinary parlance to understand exactly what this means when they say all of these things about the sustainable development. I have a chapter in my book, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, called Translating Agenda 2030. And when I say translating it, I'm talking about putting it in plain English. What are they saying, and what does it mean? What are the implications, and what can we draw from that? And everything about the UN's agenda has been clearly stated going back to its founding. They have always wanted to get rid of national sovereignty. They have said as much. They've said as much point blank. They have also said that all land should be socially owned, and that is socialized. They don't like private property. They also have had dozens of population control conferences in which they suggest very strongly that the population needs to be reduced, and they say very clearly that the consumption of the first world, as you might call it in the past, or of the developed world, must be dramatically reduced. They say the standard of living must be reduced for the developed world. So this is all on the table. So, for example, let me just give you one example of a translation of one of the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, this one is interesting, I think. This is goal number 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. So what this really means is keep women from reproducing. So what I translated is promote careerism as the only path for women, as well as governmental and intergovernmental sponsored family planning through birth control, including abortion, to reduce population growth. That's all over their literature, and that's really what it comes down to. And then, for example, goal number 6, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. This means exert centralized government and stakeholder control over water resources, dictate acceptable access to and use of rivers and streams by controlling and or eliminating unapproved industries that rely on water resources, privatize water with ownership in the hands of approved companies. So there's just a couple examples. This is all found in a chapter in my book. But all of these things, all these translations I wrought after reading extensively what the UN's goals are. And the WEF, of course, partnered with the UN in 2019 to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, the list I feel reluctant to go ahead and plow through this list because it's just voluminous, and it's terrifying. I mean, lab manufactured meat to replace and insects to replace ordinary beef, that sort of thing. Here we just last week, Governor DeSantis signs legislation to keep lab grown meat out of Florida. We've got people who want to stand up for their beloved country's borders are in trouble with these goals, because they actually have a whole section of the goals saying that we need to have replacement populations. In other words, from the undeveloped countries to be able to just have open borders into the developed countries to replace the aging population. So, in other words, forget it if you thought you should have borders on your country, because the globalists say no, you got to let in unlimited amounts of outsiders. They can't have any kind of a legal process for assimilating them, and then they can go to whatever portion of your country, et cetera, et cetera. It just goes on and on and on. And you mentioned reducing standard of living, and that restricts your travel. It restricts how you can use energy and resources and all kinds of things, what you can own. It's especially concerning for people that private property rights are being attacked. That's been a hallmark of communism or socialism from the beginning. Can you describe why private property rights are so essential for the health of the individual family, and for people to have hope and to have a productive reason to strive for in bettering their situation, et cetera?
Well, first of all, property rights, I argue, are the basis for all rights, even such things as free speech and movement. This all derives from the property in oneself, which is the first principle of lowercase libertarianism, that we all have property in ourselves, and then we have property in whatever we create from what we own. And that becomes our property, which is any assault on that is, in libertarian terms, an encroachment or an infringement, I should say, of the non-aggression principle, the NAP. So all rights derive from property rights, property in oneself and what one owns. And without this kind of property right, you basically get into a position where the state not only owns everything, but it also owns you. And in fact, that's the case of what happened in the Soviet Union and in China. After Mao's revolution and after the Bolshevik revolution in the Soviet Union, or in Russia, as it were, they then the state determined where you could work, what you would do, how much money you would make, and that was all prefixed. That's what comes with the revocation of property rights. And the first property right is the property in oneself.
Another way we've seen the property of oneself become violated just in the past few years is through forced subjection to medical experiments without informed consent, which was supposedly outlawed by international law in the Nuremberg trials and the Geneva Convention. So it's like that just went out the window in the last few years, and it's become politically correct only to say that individuals have no rights to what goes into their own body, and whether they want to submit to, for example, experimental gene therapy that will change them or their children for life without knowing what the consequences are going to be. Any further comments on the current implications of that?
Yes. On that, what really comes down to is this prioritizing of the common good over the individual sovereignty. Whenever they start saying, well, you must take this shot for the common good or the general welfare, you know that you're in the face of a totalitarian regime. Anytime the common good is prioritized, I'm not saying there is no common good. I think the common good comes when you recognize and completely give sanctity to individual rights. Other than that, it's always a bulldozer over people's rights, and they're in a total eradication of their individual self-determination. So, anytime they put public welfare or health welfare or the common good above the individual's own self-sovereignty, you're in trouble.
We've noticed, for example, on the 10th Amendment Center.com, we'll put a link to this in the description of this video. They had the story recently of Louisiana Senate passes bill to end state cooperation with the UN and the WHO. this movement among states to stand up and protect their citizens, is there reason for concern that this may be a symbolic only gesture, that the states really won't have the ability to withstand and to uphold once economic pressure gets brought to bear, either by the federal government or other forces that are in line with this globalist agenda?
Well, there are certain factors that are out of our control in the local level, even. Although if we had like a complete control of all local governance, then it wouldn't be. But they will, for example, you mentioned airline restrictions and things like this, or cars. I mean, Biden has suggested, if not decreed at this point, that by 2025, they will no longer be producing, 2035, they will no longer be producing gas-powered automobiles, which would make you subject to the EV. And the EV is dependent on the grid. And there's the possibility that they could literally shut your car off so that you couldn't charge it, because this will be it'll be reachable through AI technology and through 5G and so forth. So there are certain things that would be out of the control of the locality. But I still think that if enough localities did what we're seeing happen here with these states, like Louisiana, like Florida, then we could resist this, because the manufacturers could defy also these desiderata. The manufacturers could say, no, we're going to continue producing gasoline-powered cars, or we're not going to limit our roads usage to the hours of 7 to 9 p.m. or something like that. So this could give us a modicum of freedom from which we could expand liberty. And as long as we have a modicum of liberty, we can always expand it.
In your current run for the Libertarian Party's candidacy for the presidential race for this year, I understand this coming right up to a convention within a few weeks. Can you give us an update on how people can help support you in that and where you believe you stand in that race?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. So the way to get to my campaign is either by going to Wreck the Regime, RECtheregime.com, or Rectenwald2024.com. We could use some funding, frankly. We are running up against expenses. It's very expensive to do this. And also, we could use volunteer at this juncture. We could still use volunteer support to get this message of decentralization, a strategy for expanding and preserving liberty into the national conversation. Whether you plan on voting for me in the national election or not, it is still necessary to get this message across. And that's what this campaign is about. It is about using the platform of a presidential campaign to expand the scope of liberty through this means. And then how the race stands. It's very tight between myself and another candidate who is frankly just a leftist throwing some libertarian rhetoric around. He's for example, the transing of children. He is also for, full-scale, late-term abortion, all kinds of things, and effectively wants to use the state to foist upon us the special privileges of transgender and other peoples. I think the state should have no business in that. It should not be funding such things. And it is, at this juncture, it is funding transgender, gender reassignment therapies and surgeries, and it's also funding abortion, of course.
Well, folks, we're hopeful that you'll share this video with as many people as you can to get the word out. Michael, we're going to put a link to your book. The book is The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, Unraveling the Global Agenda. Again, in that book, folks, Michael not only lays out what the global agenda is, as in their own words, as they've stated it, but also how to translate that into human speak so that you can really understand what they're getting at. And you also have in there the grand refusal, which is a 9-point plan through which we can refuse to cooperate with this theft of our freedoms. Do you want to elaborate briefly on that for us?
Yes, I mean, the book covers every aspect of this Great Reset, from the economics of it to the social engineering of it to the technologies, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which they're using to basically institute it, and also then the climate change question. And I believe that I handled the so-called climate science very, very thoroughly, and that's quite a debunking of a lot of the claims that are made. Then finally, as you said, there's this grand refusal, which includes a 9-point plan, a very easy set of steps to undertake yourselves, your families, your communities, to resist this global imposition upon our lives and its great infringement and curtailment of freedom that it represents.
One last thing, and that is, we've talked about this before, how you can always pass the smell test on a piece of legislation or an initiative to see if it's stating the exact opposite of what it claims to state. A number of these initiatives that are coming out from individual states to push back and say that global edicts from the UN, the WHO, the World Economic Forum will not be binding upon the people of our state, etc., are being spun by members of the legacy press as restrictions on the people of their states, because they're said, like, for example, 15-minute cities. The goal from the global agenda of sustainable goals is saying that people we should make cities small enough, and people shouldn't travel farther than 15 minutes to save on resources, that sort of thing. And by states taking the initiative of saying, you're not going to force us into that style of living just because you want to impose that from on high, those initiatives are being spun as restrictions on the freedom of the people of that state, who need to be able to have closer access to their pharmacy and their grocery store and things like that, and not have to drive so far. So they say, gee, if we want to make some improvements in our cities, we'll have our hands tied. So it's these conspiracy theorists that are ultra restrictive on the flexibility of government to respond to a changing world, that kind of thing. Can you address just briefly that phenomenon of turning things on their head, turning things upside down, calling light dark and dark light along the way?
Well, this is a very typical tactic of a totalitarian regime, or a wannabe totalitarian regime, and that is the inversion of reality, the inversion of truth, and the inversion of morality. Frankly, this is very typical. This is treated in another book called Political Ponerology, for which I wrote the foreword. It talks about how totalitarian regimes basically issue doublespeak endlessly. What's black is white, and Orwell treated this very well. So this is typical. So you have to be able to decode what they're saying. They're going to try to spin this, as you put it, as restrictions, whereas what these impositions are, they are restrictions that are being resisted at these levels. So all the time, look for the inversions and just flip it on its head, and you'll have the truth.
Yeah, we've been figuring that out for a long time about any law coming out of Washington. For example, the private property rights, people aren't aware that nothing in the bank belongs to them anymore. Once they deposit it, it belongs to the bank. And yet the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act was called the Banking and Consumer Protection Act. So anyway, you can pretty much figure anything come out of Washington, turn the words around, and it probably describes it pretty accurately.
Or the Inflation Reduction Act.
There you go. That's perfect. Yeah.
Which was all about inflation.
Michael, we want to help any way we can to support the broadening of awareness of your campaign, if for no other reason than to get these important issues out into the public square and into public discourse, because it's hard. It's hard when you go trying to search online to find a balanced view of these important topics, especially one that respects our God-given rights of self-sovereignty, et cetera, as individuals. So we're grateful to have you fighting hard for the ordinary person, for natural law, et cetera, and hope you the very best outcome on your candidacy. And just thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule ahead of the convention here to spend time with us here on Liberty and Finance.
It's my great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Donegan.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for May 6th through May 13th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature 2023 1-ounce Silver Krugerrand at $3.10 over spot. We also have 1 10th-ounce gold Canadian maples at $29 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.